Let's pick things up there for tonight's Political Insider. Joining me, Dave Levinthal, senior reporter with the Center for Public Integrity. Well, Pope Francis delivered an historic address to Congress touching on some hot political topics. Dave, this speech was highly anticipated by Democrats, but not so much so by Republicans, who tend to be more religious. Why?
Morris, you had a lot of Republicans who were very concerned about what the Pope was going to say about, for example, climate change, what the Pope was going to say about economic inequality. And the Pope delivered what I think by any measure, whether you are left or right or in the middle, was a remarkable address. English is not his first, second, or even third language, delivered it all in English, and he made everyone squirm, and I think he lifted everyone up at the same time. The Pope proved in a major way that he's this pan-political figure who does not fit neatly into our common notions of what a Democrat is or our common notions of what a Republican is. And I think a perfect example of that is when he talked about the sanctity of life and how we should respect life from the beginning to the end. Everyone thought he was going to talk very distinctly about abortion. He turned it around and almost did a bait and switch and talked about the death penalty. So he was keeping everyone guessing during this entire speech. And I think by any measure, too, it was a very positive and a very hopeful speech, even if you didn't personally agree with everything that the Pope was saying.
Now, Pope Francis has become one of the most beloved religious figures in today's society, even with his political messages. Republican presidential candidate Governor Chris Christie called the Pope wrong for praising the growing relationship between the U.S. and Cuba. Now, from a political standpoint, Dave, could that hurt Christie's popularity? I mean, don't politicians need to be careful about what they say about Pope Francis?
Politicians do absolutely, Morris, need to be careful what they say about Pope Francis in the sense that his approval rating worldwide is better than effectively any politician in the United States going right now. But at the same time, Chris Christie, or it could be said for other presidential candidates as well, probably has other fish to fry at this point. Chris Christie is just struggling to get anyone to notice him in what's an incredibly competitive field of about 15 candidates still on the Republican side, even with Scott Walker and Rick Perry dropping out in recent weeks. So whether it's Chris Christie or anyone else, the Pope will come and the Pope will go and go back to Rome, but they're still going to have a very, very difficult fight on their hands with all of these other candidates trying to vie for time.
You know, religion has become a big part of the 2016 race this week, from Dr. Ben Carson commenting on Muslims in the White House to Pope Francis addressing hot-button issues like climate change. The U.S. likes to pride itself on a division between church and state, but how much of a split is there, especially when it comes to presidential politics?
Well, when you look at some of the visuals of today, Morris, you had the Pope speaking in Congress, above him, "In God we trust." And then at the same time, too, you have very clearly in the Constitution no religious test for running for office. When I was a kid and went to public school, I pledged allegiance to the flag of the United States, one nation under God, yet at the same time, we've had, of course, this great argument going nationwide about prayer in public schools. So oftentimes, the United States has a very complicated relationship with religion. You know, the cheap history of this all is that it was set up separation of church and state so that the government would not form its own official religion or have an official religion, but at the same time to expect going forward in this presidential race that religion nevertheless is going to be as major a part of the debate, the discussion, and the rhetoric of candidates both on the Republican side and the Democratic side than we've ever had before, and you're seeing this in spades over the past many weeks.
Now, Dave, Ben Carson said the money's been rolling in since he made the comment that he would not support a Muslim in the White House. How much do you think he's raked in?
When we have heard from his people, his surrogates, they've said that he's brought in well into the six figures, which is not chump change when it comes to a presidential race at this stage over a very concentrated period of time. So there's going to be a certain constituency that any message, no matter what you say, is going to resonate with them. It might be a very limited number of people. It might be broader than that. But oftentimes when a candidate says something that is very controversial, that's very bold, whether you agree with it or not, it's going to be something that resonates with enough people who are going to ultimately open up their wallet or get out their credit card and say, all right, I support that guy, I'm going to make a donation. The question, though, is a candidate like Ben Carson, who is doing very well in the polls, is he going to be able to broaden his appeal out to enough people where it's going to make a difference once we get to February and March and we have contests in Iowa and New Hampshire and all the rest of the early states where, again, he's going to be running Ben Carson against many many other people, and it's probably just not going to cut it to have 10 or 15% of the electorate at that point supporting you.
At some point, we'll see a thinning of the herd even more. Dave Levinthal, senior reporter with the Center for Public Integrity. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Morris.